You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and I'm joined by your co-host, Kevin. Alex, unfortunately, not going to be able to make it with us tonight. He's got some of those JOB things going on, and so we'll catch him back next week. But Kevin and I have got a wonderful show for you tonight. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing awesome. So, again, playoff hockey, right? Been watching a lot of that. It's been good. The Avs are rolling, so that's good. OTAs have started, so you're starting to, get rumblings, at least press clippings come out of some of these camps and people starting to talk a little bit. We are middle towards the dynasty drafts. Derek, I know we're doing a couple startups, a couple different types of leagues that we're messing around with here right now. So it's kind of keeping us active on some of the things that are going on. But overall, it's a great time of year. We are like a week away from what the unofficial start of summer is, being post Memorial Day.
Very, very true, right? Like lots of good stuff going on out there. Lots of NFL news coming out. Lots of things breaking here. And just overall good times. I know some of the deals that's been interesting. Some of the conversations you and I've had kind of coming through on some of these different type of leagues that we're playing in, and some of these startups and some of these eliminator things and some of that. Shout out to the Fantasy Cares Eliminator out there and all the work that's gone into that and all the guys involved with that one. Shout out to every one of y'all. Y'all are doing some amazing work, and it's a lot of fun to participate in that one. So thank you very much for all of your hard work with that one. Before we kind of get going into some things here, we got a couple of comments coming in. The Stacks app saying, let's go. Absolutely. Let's get this thing going. And Leadership Lessons say the boys are back and talking fantasy football. You know it. Every Tuesday night, 11 p.m. Eastern, we are here and we are talking the foosball of the fantasy variety. So always a great time there. And we've got some interesting teams tonight, right? We've got the Chicago Bears. We're going to hit up the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to hit up the Denver Broncos. And, before we get going, the hometown team there. And I can imagine that's going to be
hometown team, baby.
So before we get rolling on that, make sure that you head over to the YouTubes, click the subscribe button, ring that bell. Make sure you're getting all the live notifications, because we are also going to have, starting in really about in July, we're going to be bringing you more fantasy knowledge and more fantasy content than you could ever hope to really consume. But we're going to put a ton of it out there and get you guys ready for your fantasy drafts there. And the best way to do that is go to YouTube and get all of that content. Also find us at Good Old Boys FF on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We've also got the Twitch channel out there for you as well. That's also Good Old Boys FF, and the website goodoldboysff.com. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start getting rolling into some of these teams here. And starting it up, Chicago Bears, who finished 6-11 last year, a 53% pass, 47% run. They are ranked 27th in points for, 24th in yards for. New head coach in Matt Eberflus, and the new offensive coordinator in Luke Getsy. And we'll go ahead and head right on into the running back room, where we always start. David Montgomery last year was running back 20, 225 rush attempts, 849 yards, 7 touchdowns, 42 receptions, 51 targets for 301 yards, and 0 tutties through the air. Kevin, what are your thoughts here on David Montgomery?
I like Monty. I do. I think that a lot of people kind of forget about him, think his season a couple years ago was a fluke with the historic but really strong run down the stretch, right? And last year didn't quite pan out, right? He got injured for middle of the season, missed 4 games. So that kind of dampened his fantasy statistics. But once he came back, he picked right back up, and he was that borderline RB1 for you down the stretch. And a lot of what was happening was Justin Fields was finding him in the passing game, right? David Montgomery is a good receiver of the football. He did that very well at Iowa State. And he didn't get that much use his first season because Tariq Cohen was still there. Last year, a little bit, but not so much, right? Quarterback, a little bit quarterback dependent. They weren't dumping it down. They kind of had him in the block a little bit more. But last year, you started to see his hands show up. And because of that, I really like David Montgomery. He is a guy that I think has running back one potential and really is a guy that you can get at more of a value, right? If you're waiting a little bit on running back, right? Especially in, well, I guess really in any format, but specifically super flex format, you can pick him up in the third or fourth round in a super flex. So if you're going single QB, and kind of how some of that dances around a little bit, you can still grab him at the top of the third round in singles, like even with all the running backs going and kind of how things change around. So as your first or possibly second running back, to be able to kind of pick him up in that, third or fourth round range, no matter the format, with the potential of finishing running back one, there's value built into that pick. You're not having to spend, on a high end pick like I'm going to say Nick Chubb only because I think by the time the seasons are over, Monty and Nick Chubb's scoring output will be about the same for fantasy purposes. So you can get him at a bit of a discount. And he's going to be a focal point of this offense because there's not a whole lot going on in Chicago offensively just yet.
Right. And it'll be interesting, too, to see how the coaching changeover and regime change, messes, or not necessarily mess around, but plays out with some of that thing there as well. Because one of the things in the past that you could always rely on with David Montgomery was him to get 20 touches a game, right? Like he was one of those that he was going to be a volume back, just because of how Chicago ran their offense and how they did things. I think a lot of that is going to continue on, and I think that you'll still see him getting about 20 opportunities a game on that one. So absolutely, like I love the fact of where you can get him in drafts, right? He's the beginning of the third round, actually middle of the third round type of thing right now, as far as that goes. So you can get a mid third round value and a guy that should easily finish running back, mid running back 2 at the worst, right? You think about this last season, finished running back 20, and that was with missing 4 games in the middle of the season there. And again, right, to your point, over the second half of the season, when he played that entire second half, he was running back 11 through that stretch of games, that last half of the season there. So I absolutely love David Montgomery, and I love the fact that of where you can get him in drafts. And this is a guy that when you're in there in the third round, like this is pretty much a smash the yes button for me. Draft, go that route, because it's not going to surprise me to see him end up with a double-digit touchdown. I think you'll end up seeing him get 275 carries when it's all said and done. I think his targets and receptions are going to remain somewhat similar, right? I see him kind of in that 40 to 55 kind of range as far as receptions when it's all said and done there, and similar output, 300 to 400 yards when it's all said and done there. But not going to surprise me to see him tick up and finish, running back 10, 11, 12, kind of in that range when it's all said and done. And that's tremendous value when you're talking about a third round running back. Those are the types of differences that can help set you apart for season long and can ultimately run you down the stretch to try and, put you in a position to win some cash, win some trophies. So love this one here. Let's go ahead and we'll head on over to the next running back in the room, unless you have any other thoughts on David Montgomery.
No, we both like Monty. That's he's a shining spot in this offense.
Absolutely. One comment coming in here before we get to the next one. Competitive Hedge podcast. Kenny there, who's been a former guest on the show, said, I know it's not Atlanta, but I heard Ridley's value is sky high on FanDuel. That's a little rim shot there. Maybe a little bit too soon, but I like it. Let's go ahead and head on over to Khalil Herbert, who finished running back 60 last year, 103 rush attempts, 443 yards, 2 touchdowns, 14 receptions, 16 targets, 96 yards. Your thoughts on Khalil Herbert?
I thought
your camera's off, by the way.
What in the world am I hitting, guys? I thought Herbert filled in pretty well here. Rookie running back getting thrust in for 4 games. trying to fill in for the injured Montgomery. And I thought he did a pretty decent job of carving himself out a role. Now, I still think that depending on what this offensive regime wants to do, I still think that we're going to see David Montgomery kind of being a more traditional workhorse back than what a lot of teams are implementing these days. So something along the lines of, 65 to 70% of the touches coming out of the running back position, I do think are going to go through Montgomery as long as he can stay healthy. So Herbert is a nice piece to keep an eye on, right? Like, I don't know if he's quite handcuff material in deeper drafts. Yeah, he is for sure. But he's definitely a guy that if you have David Montgomery and if you feel like your positions, if you feel like your roster is built out, go ahead and snag Herbert. There's nothing wrong with having him there. Or just be prepared that if you have Monty and he goes down, based off of what Herbert did last year, it's going to cost a decent amount of fab to get him, because Herbert did show, I don't know that he is, but he did show that he has mid RB2 potential as the standalone back in this offense. So he doesn't have standalone value with Monty healthy, I believe, but I do think he is a guy that if David Montgomery were to go down, Khalil Herbert becomes a guy that everybody in the league is going to run to the waiver wire, and then it's just a matter of how much fab do you want to spend on the guy.
Yeah, and that was one of the interesting things there last year, right? Like, I remember having a discussion with somebody who was trying to tell me that, he came out, Khalil Herbert came out of the blue, and this was a complete anomaly, and, you couldn't have predicted this thing. Well, we did. We did call this one last year on the show when it was going through there. And when you look at it from the standpoint that the way Chicago ran their offense, and Damien Williams was also down as well, who was a backup for Chicago last year as well during that David Montgomery injury time. It was no surprise that Khalil Herbert was going to get a ton of volume and a ton of carries, and he absolutely did. And those of us that played him were well rewarded for going that way, because on week 6 he finished running back 11, week 7 finished running back 9, which isn't bad for a guy that you pluck up off the waiver wire and stick in, because of a need of injury on that one. So I do like it. I think you're absolutely right as far as where you're valuing Khalil Herbert there for redraft. I think, deep leagues, handcuff, non-deep leagues, don't. What's your thought?
Just going along with that, even in week 8, right? It wasn't his strongest week as the starting running back, but still RB33. For a guy that got picked up off the waiver wire and who got thrown in, he helped float your team. Right? He didn't carry it like he did or could have in weeks 6 or 7, but he didn't hurt you in week 8 either. So we kind of saw, based off of his volume games, right? Like week 9 was probably his worst, but that was against a really stingy San Francisco defense. They were they were home that game. But, I think
week 9 was against Pittsburgh. It was in Pittsburgh.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, the Pittsburgh game. And so that was on the road against Pittsburgh. So 33 against San Francisco. Like, I'm okay with these numbers as a guy who fills in. So sorry, I was looking through that, and the dude did not hurt you one bit. And I think that you can trust that, where a lot of people will go after Alexander Madison, right? We know Dalvin Cook's, not traditionally a healthy running back. A lot of people with Tony Pollard because of, Zeke's deterioration and injury concerns over the past couple seasons. I mean, Khalil Herbert maybe not be quite in that rank, but he's not too far behind. So if you're looking for a solid backup to have on your roster and thinking maybe you can strike gold, his statistics match up very well between guys like a Tony Pollard and an Alexander Madison.
Right. Well, and you look at it too, right? You referenced the week 9 one. David Montgomery actually came back in week 9 there, and they kind of cannibalized each other. Plus the fact that Pittsburgh was playing pretty good against the run that game, and Chicago was kind of out of it from the get-go and having to rely on trying to throw the ball to come back into it. But, David Montgomery actually out-touched Khalil Herbert in week 9 there. One of those that he was kind of more of a spell back, letting him work his way back in there. Going for 2. commenting in there as well, saying David Montgomery last year of his contract by now. I would agree with that absolutely, especially you're talking dynasty. Go get a guy like Khalil Herbert who has a clear path, and I think he's shown enough of what he can do there that Chicago's not necessarily going to rush out and replace him with high draft capital on something like that. Any other thoughts there?
No, I think that's spot on, right? You want Monty in redrafts because guys in their last year of the contract it's hard to quantify what value you get out of a guy who's hungry in the last year of his contract. But if you can keep a pulse on that, big advantage in redraft leagues and in dynasty leagues, like you just mentioned, for Herbert, if they can't come to terms with David Montgomery, you have a guy who can step in and is a useful part of your roster, right? He may not be the key component, but he is a guy who is a useful component in building out your entire roster for dynasty purposes.
Absolutely. And that comment coming from Jeff over at Going for Two. Guys, if you haven't checked out Going for Two, we've had Jeff on the show. Absolutely knows his stuff. Make sure you're checking out them as well. Let's go ahead and head on over to the wide receiver room here. Darnell Mooney finished wide receiver 24, 81 receptions, 140 targets, 1,055 yards, 4 touchdowns, a 26.7% of the target share. Your thoughts on Darnell Mooney?
I
know that you're his biggest fan and the president of his fan club, but we're going to have to see past that.
This is one of those situations where, as much as I don't think he's a great receiver, the numbers don't lie. Right? The target share, the snap share, the targets, like all these things add up. And this is something, and this is a player that I have had to kind of personally get past some of my hot air phase of. He's a viable fantasy asset, and he is a guy that you can get on your team as your wide receiver 3 if you're going early wide receivers, or you can get by with him as a wide receiver 2 if you're waiting a bit on receiver and tinkering around, right? If you go tight end early, right? That's a position. You go tight end early with the idea of getting a Darnell Mooney-like player a little bit later that still has some upside. Again, Chicago doesn't have a lot of offensive components around this team just yet. Darnell Mooney is going to be a target monster for Justin Fields as he continues to develop as a quarterback, as he's the most established wide receiver on this Chicago Bears team. The trust factor, like his youth, all things, this is off-season hype, right? Off-season hype, but all things coming out of Chicago, from head coach to general manager, like they are hyping this kid up. They love what he's doing. They love his attitude and what he's been about. So I'm going to give my stamp of approval on drafting Darnell Mooney, as much as that might hurt me personally for what we're doing here in looking at the fantasy aspect. His volume and his numbers are too good to pass up. And I know you and I just missed out on him in
the Fantasy Cares Eliminator.
In the Eliminator draft, right? We missed out on him by 1 pick. That was the guy we said, we love to hate him, but the numbers, again, don't lie. This is the guy we're going to take. And 1 pick before us just went right off the board, so we had to pivot just slightly. But I see the path, right? And I think maybe it's taken this long for me to come around, so I'm not going to, hold my flag and say I've been calling this. I've been really slow to adjust to this, quite frankly. But I see the path, and I see the path to a little bit more consistency than what he showed last year, and probably a bit better fantasy output. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he finished somewhere around 19, 20, 21. Right? Like, he finished last year at 24. I'm not saying he's going to blow the doors off of it. Chicago's still going to have a hard time moving the ball. But because of the volume, you figure 4 touchdowns is probably a little light, as Justin Fields was getting used to the speed of the NFL. So maybe you get a couple more tucked in there. If he can get to 1,200 yards and 90 receptions, that's prime wide receiver 2 category.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think I'm a little bit probably more bullish on him than I think you are there. Right. Like you're talking that 19 to 21 range. I think that you'll see him probably sneak up closer to fringe. Right. It's not going to surprise me to see him get up there just from the volume standpoint, around, wide receiver 15, 14, somewhere in that range. I'm not calling him that he's going to sneak up fully into wide receiver 1, but I could see a world in which he can get close. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we saw Allen Robinson on some atrocious Bears team do it just through volume type of deal there. And I do think that you're going to see Justin Fields take a step forward this year, to the point where, maybe instead of 140 targets to get 80 receptions, maybe he hits 80 receptions at about 120 targets. And then everything from there is kind of gravy on top of that. Maybe he sees the end zone a little bit here, a little bit more there. And, maybe creeps up around the 6 or 7 mark when it comes to TDs there. But he is a guy that right now going off the board in most cases at the end of the 6th, beginning of the 7th type of draft pick. It's hard to find a wide receiver in that range that's going to see 140 to 150 targets, which I think is what's going to do it. And again, I think that he's going to get up there, not necessarily through just spectacular plays or big play ability. He's going to get there through volume and volume alone on this one. So it's tough to finish outside of that kind of wide receiver 15, 16 mark, seeing 140, 150 targets. Like you just don't see that happen typically. Typically the guys that are finishing, around that wide receiver 20 mark are closer to the, 120 to 130 target type of guys there. So I think he'll get there just based on volume there. Jeff also bringing a comment in here saying the Bears aren't going to be very good and will have to throw a ton to stay in games. Mooney will benefit. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the biggest thing, and it is an outlier that we're not going to truly see until the season starts, is Justin Fields' growth, right? Because Mooney had 7 weeks last year at wide receiver 24 or above. But he also had 6 weeks at wide receiver 50 or lower.
Yeah.
6 weeks. Is that what I said? 6 weeks. So there is some boom bust there. And really, what I'd like to see is that shift by a couple games, right? No one's going to be perfect every single game, but I would like to see him in that top 24, maybe instead of 7 times, maybe 9, right? Just over half the season, or right at half the season, 18 weeks, 17 games. So just over half the season above that 24 benchmark, and maybe drop that to, 4 or 5 games where he's wide receiver 4 or worse in the rankings. So that's the thing that scares me, right? Is, do I want a guy with the boom bust? And I think in most cases, because of where you're drafting him, you take it and you just swallow it, right? Like you said, take it in the 7th or 8th round, you can take a guy with some boom bust and be okay. But for the sake of his overall fantasy relevance and not being burned in weeks where you have to start him as your wide receiver 1 on your roster because of bye weeks or injuries or whatever, I'd like to see that even out just a little bit and feel a little bit more confident than it's a 50-50 shot he's worth his value on my roster this week.
Right. Yeah, no, I absolutely get that one. Kind of going a little bit deeper on that one there as well, right? You were talking about a lot of the boom bust, things like that. If you take out the games that, like, if you just look at games where he saw 7 or more targets, it evened it out quite a bit to the point where you saw a lot more of those games, happen where he finished much better on there. So again, kind of speaking back to that volume play on that one, whereas the games that, he didn't do very well, saw 5 targets, saw 5 targets, saw 5 targets, 4 targets. He also had a couple of games where he saw 7 targets and didn't do very well, but that number at 7 targets really kind of leveled him out there as far as taking some of that boom bust out there. And he had more games inside the top 24 at 7 targets than he had out of it on that one there. So I think that's one of the things to keep in mind, is if you think that he's going to see about 7 targets or more a game, which I absolutely think that he will, because I think he'll see, again, 140, 150 type of targets on this one. So I think that he'll be just fine. One more comment before we head on over to the next one. The Lions might sweep him. You're not wrong. I could see that one. I've had some spicy takes on the Lions this offseason that I'm still playing a little close to the chest, but.
Well, hell, the Lions were a DeAndre Swift bobbled catch away.
Correct.
From beating, what was that, week 2 last year? I believe
it was early. It was
early on in the season, right? But DeAndre Swift he had the ball and just kind of turned to look for the pylon too early and bobbled it, and it cost the Lions that game. I don't think that's too far fetched, right? Nope. The Bears are a work in progress. They just are. They're not complete offensively by any stretch. Defensively, they're a little bit further along, but the loss of Khalil Mack is going to do something for the Bears, right? Like, you still have Roquan there sucking up the middle, but Mack, yes, he was injured a little bit more often than what Bears fans would like to have, but he was a presence. You had to account for him on that Bears defense. And now you're looking for guys to kind of step in and fill that pass rushing void and be disruptive along the defensive line. So the Bears are going to be trailing in a lot of games, right? They're going to be throwing a little bit. It's maybe Justin Fields is able to use his legs a bit more because he's a little bit more confident with the offense. So there's some pieces that might work out, but there's a lot of work to be done in the Chicago team before they are challenging for a division title, let alone going into the playoffs and going deep.
Right. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and head over to the rookie. Not often that we get to talk about a 25-year-old rookie, but here we go. Velus Jones, drafted in the 3rd round, pick 71 out of Tennessee. Your thoughts on Velus Jones?
I don't mind him in dynasty drafts. Like, rookie drafts is kind of where I'm targeting him. Redrafts, I'm not. Like, right. I'm just not targeting this guy in any type of a redraft league. He was okay at Tennessee. Like, and I get it. I'm a Georgia fan. I'm not gonna gush about Tennessee players outside of the fact that two of my favorite players of all time both came out of Tennessee, and Peyton Manning and Arian Foster. So as much as I don't like the Vols, I can be objective, right? I love Peyton Manning. I loved Arian Foster. Derek, you know that firsthand, how much I pounded the table for that guy his entire career. Velus Jones, I think he will grow into a good piece. He's not a redraft option for me this year. Dynasty rookie drafts, you can get him in the 3rd, sometimes even the 4th round, depending on how teams are drafting. So a little bit of upside and value there for a guy who should grow into probably the true number 2 on this team, right behind Mooney. It should go Mooney, then Jones, and then Cole Kmet, right? It's something like that. But this year, I just don't quite see that happening. So for now, I'm going to say pass. But if you're in a dynasty league, I say go for it if you can get the value late 3rd, early to mid 4th, just depending on how your rookie draft is going.
Yeah, that's where I've been getting him, is the 4th. And I don't, the 4th round, you're taking dart throws anyway. Might as well take a guy that, has a cleaner path in the 4th round than just about anybody else out there on that one. So I'll buy in on what you're talking about with the dynasty, and I've been soaking up him where I can in that 4th round. It does kind of concern me a little bit. Like, normally with dynasty, you're talking about guys that are 21, 22, maybe, you might find that old rookie at 23 type of thing. Pringle is, Velus Jones is 25 years old, spent 6 years in college, 4 with USC, then 2 with Tennessee on the transfer. So it's just not often that we see a guy this old come in there, and you're talking about taking a 25-year-old guy in dynasty drafts. So, but I'm right there with you. Pass on.
I'm okay with that, because most of what dynasty is, right? It is a 3 to 5 year window. Right. That's all you're really playing for, right? You're playing for a 3 to 5 year window. In 3 years, he's going to be 28, but again, he's going to be coming up on wanting to be able to get that one big payday in his career, most likely. So if he can pan out and keep with it, there's opportunity there. again, it's a 4th-round rookie draft pick, guys. Like, it's not anything that we're spending high capital on or anything like that. This is why we're saying don't draft him in redraft leagues unless you have extremely deep benches. If Mooney goes down, yeah, maybe he's a guy that you throw, $6, $7, maybe even $10 at fab budget on just to see if you have a piece and what he can become if he's seeing a larger target share. But, don't jump over the moon for this guy just yet. We're not saying he's the next Randy Moss. We're just saying it is worth keeping your finger on the pulse for a guy who has a clear path to playing time when a lot of rookie wide receivers don't necessarily have that, who are drafted in the 3rd round or later.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and head over to the free agent signing that they brought in. Byron Pringle, 50 wide receiver 58, 37 receptions, 52 targets, 512 yards, 5 touchdowns, 9.43 target share last year with the Chiefs. Your thoughts on Byron Pringle?
Pass.
Yes.
It sounds really pass. Like, he was the benefit of a couple really deep throws from Patrick Mahomes to get some of those touchdowns. He was a flash in the pan, but he was the 5th option on the Chiefs in most cases. He steps up here. Maybe he's the 3rd or 4th option with the Bears. Comes from the culture in Kansas City, which is something that you obviously want to cultivate, right? So maybe it's a good work ethic. Maybe it's how to communicate with your quarterback. But he's coming in, so there's not the rapport with Justin Fields. So he's probably the immediate number 2 as Velus comes in and starts to learn the playbook and everything else. But as the season goes on, it's going to be Mooney, then Jones, then Pringle, not, any other way as I see it right now.
Yeah. I would also pass on it as well. It'll be interesting to see. I was reading some reports earlier that he may be facing a few legal issues going on in Florida, stemming from an alleged incident while driving. So it's something to keep an eye out on that one as well. Because if he misses any time on that one, that takes him even further into the pass category for me as well. So I am out on Byron Pringle. Let's go ahead and move over to the tight end room. Cole Kmet, tight end 21 last year, 60 receptions, 93 targets, 612 yards, 0 touchdowns, 17.75% of the target share. Thoughts on Cole Kmet?
For a tight end, I like that target share number, right? Mm-hmm. That's a healthy target share number. I want to see the Bears and Justin Fields find ways to get this guy active in the end zone, right? Like, he was a very good receiving tight end coming out of Notre Dame. He is a guy who is built for the red zone and just being able to kind of flash out and make some of those tough catches against some smaller safeties or being able to kind of outbody the linebackers, if you will. So he's a fringe tier 1, most likely tier 2 tight end in redraft leagues. Like, I'm not jumping the gun to come get this guy until the Bears show that they have enough offensive continuity to move the ball and put points up on the board. There's just not enough wow factor to go around on the Chicago offense for me to be drafting up a whole bunch of pieces. I like Monty, signed off on Mooney. We'll get to Justin Fields here in a minute, but that is about it as far as the investment that I'm going to have into this offense this season.
Right. Cole Kmet for me kind of strikes it. Yeah, he's not going to fall that far, but he has the makeup as far as what you kind of look for in a lot of those, those late tight end type of guys there, right? And who knows, maybe he'll fall that far because of a wide or tight end 21 finish last year, but there's still a lot of hype going on with this guy here. 0 touchdowns on a season is actually kind of hard to do when you played as much as the snap count as he has. He was in there on 83% of the snaps. And so very interesting that he didn't manage to come down with the touchdown on that one. 93 targets is a lot of targets for a tight end. So I kind of like this one. And if I'm going with a late tight end and he's sitting there in rounds 13 or 14, I'm smashing the yes button on drafting him and going that route. Just from the standpoint, you're not going to find a guy with that much opportunity going forward. And Jimmy Graham, like it or not, Jimmy Graham, with all of his 23 targets last year, caught 3 touchdowns on this Bears team. And Jimmy Graham's no longer on this offense. So at that point, I have to believe that those are touchdown looks that would go Cole Kmet's way. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see him tick up there around 4, maybe 5 touchdowns on this one. I see very similar as far as targets and yardage there. So I kind of like it. And I could see him being a sneaky, tight end 13, tight end 12 type of thing on this season. There's a path for it anyway. And we'll see how that one plays out. Any other thoughts there?
No, the path is there. And last year, right, where we joked around doing the team breakdown that the Bears had more tight ends on their roster than anybody in the NFL. Right now, they only have 3 guys of note on this roster, right? James O'Shaughnessy and Ryan Griffin came over in the offseason, and both these guys are predominantly run blocking tight ends. Ryan Griffin does have the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and spell Kmet a little bit. Catch the ball in the backfield, catch the ball in the flat and short yardage situations. We saw that with the Jets, but mainly he's a blocker. James O'Shaughnessy is the same way. Yes, he came from Jacksonville, who couldn't move the ball to save their life, but again, he's a run blocking tight end. Kmet can block, and he can block very well, but he by far has the best hands in this group. So the path is there. You're correct. It's just the offense is not dynamic enough for me to really say, oh yeah, that's the guy that I want to bank.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
in my tight end position.
Right. He's a guy that, late tight end, love that type of deal there. And it's tough to find a tight end that's going to see that kind of target share. But
Irv Smith Jr. or Cole Kmet?
Cole Kmet.
Evan Ingram or Cole Kmet?
I think I'll still take Cole Kmet.
Okay. The rookie that went down to Arizona out of CSU.
Trey McBride?
McBride or Kmet. And McBride's playing behind Ertz.
Right, he's playing behind Ertz, and they've got other receiving options there as well. I'll take Cole Kmet still.
Okay, fair enough.
Reason being, right, I'll go a little bit further on this one. All of those guys you just mentioned there are going to most likely be the 3rd or 4th targeted guy on that one, right? There's a very real possibility that Cole Kmet is second behind Darnell Mooney in total targets this year for Bears receiving options. That's a very, very real possibility. Whereas all those other guys, I don't know that, right? Evan Ingram's probably the most intriguing guy that you mentioned there. Evan Ingram, I don't know that we see him get more than 70 targets this year. I think that's probably about where I'm going to kind of cap him, is 70 to 80. And I think you'll see Cole Kmet be pretty comfortably around 100 total targets there. So I'm going to take the more opportunity in an offense that is going to be as anemic as Jacksonville.
Cole Kmet or Noah Fant?
Yeah, I've seen the Drew Lock show. I'll take Justin Fields.
Fair. And again, that was just kind of another situation I was thinking, right?
Yeah. And again, you're talking about a guy that's going to most likely be the 3rd in line there between Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf.
We both know that he'll probably be 2nd because Drew Lock ain't going to throw the ball down the field.
True. He gets those. Well, the problem is anyway, that's a different conversation.
Get to when we touch the Seahawks. Sorry, yeah. I'm getting us down a rabbit hole. Well, move on. Just a little banter for fun. Sorry, move on.
All right, moving along. So that brings us over to the quarterback room. Justin Fields, quarterback 31 last year, 159 completions, 270 attempts, a 55.6% completion percentage, 1870 as far as yards, 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 72 rush attempts, 420 yards, and 2 tutties. Thoughts on Justin Fields?
I want to like Justin Fields. I really do. In fact, I was mad when the Broncos didn't draft Justin Fields last year. And I also think that on this very show, I proclaimed that Justin Fields was going to be the best rookie quarterback out of that draft class. So I like Justin Fields. I want to like Justin Fields. I need his completion percentage to get up a little bit, right? 55.7 ain't going to do it. We got to get up to 60. Got to find a way to get up to 60%. I think the interceptions, as he's still getting used to, I think the interceptions probably stay about the same, but where you're going to see some growth, I think, is on the passing touchdown side. maybe you see him a little bit more confident and he's able to scramble a little bit more. So instead of the 72 carries, maybe he ends up with, maybe ends up at 92, an extra 2 carries a game on average, something like that, to kind of boost him up even higher there. So there's the path there. How well can this offensive line hold up to give him time is a big question. And do we see him taking an accelerated jump from 31 up to 20? I don't know that I quite see that this season, right? I see 31 to maybe 24, 25. A lot of that's dependent on his rushing statistics, right? If he's able to really turn it on with his legs, the sky becomes the limit, right? And maybe he can make that massive jump from 31 to 13. And you got a guy late in the draft who's carrying your super flex team. I tried that last year. It didn't work out so well for me, but we're going to see how it goes. So I do expect improvement. I think he is going to be a little bit more comfortable with what's going on around him. If he can use Kmet more as the security blanket, if him and Mooney continue to build on his chemistry, a whole new offensive philosophy is coming to Chicago this season. It will be interesting to see how this plays out and works with him. If they're able to utilize his strengths and his skill set, you could see a very serviceable quarterback 2, especially in a super flex league, that will provide upside of a QB1 on weeks where he's able to, whether it's scramble or if he's just lights out that week and is able to throw, 3-4 touchdown passes and look like the guy the Bears drafted him to be.
Right. When you look at his fantasy finishes last year, where he had good fantasy finishes, didn't necessarily come on the strength of the arm. It came far more with his legs more often than not. And he had a couple of really good weeks there, but this is one of those that you're going to have to see him take a pretty good step forward. I actually put the wrong number on there now that I'm looking at this. It was 58.9% completion rate, and I believe I put 55 on that slide there. So my apologies there. But a 59% completion percentage, realistically, you want to see him a tick up, even 63 to 65, kind of in that range. And that's where the Bears are going to need him to play, and that's where he's going to need to be playing at for fantasy relevancy here, which will also help some of the other, statistics and numbers there as well. But, just like you said, I think gives you a ton of upside with what he can do on the ground and with his legs. The arm and the reading the defenses and all of that, still a little bit of work in progress. So I'm very interested to see what that looks like going forward on this one. And I think we'll see a little bit more as the practices start to resume. We see some more of these things coming out in training camp, all of that. But right now I'm going to be out on Justin Fields as even my second QB and my super flex type of deal. Unless he's like my third QB out there.
So that's a little surprising, but okay, fair enough. If Justin Fields missed 5 games last year due to being injured and didn't play a whole lot at all in week 1, and about half the snaps in week 2. So really he missed 6 games. I guess, you carry that out, and maybe he's going to be better than either one of us are giving him credit for, Derek. You take his complete work of games and you extrapolate it out over another 6. So what? He missed a third. So this number, these are 2/3 of what his total numbers should be. So I guess that puts him around 12 touchdown passes, maybe another 2 interceptions or so. So maybe he does finish up in closer to quarterback 15, 16 than either one of us are giving him credit for. Because I just, started diving into that here real quick. And there's a lot of time missed.
Right, I'm looking at that. And if you extrapolate that out, you're talking another 600 yards passing, right, with a third of the season, 7 touchdowns. You add 2 to 3 on there, you're talking 10. You're still talking probably 13 interceptions, and maybe he gets another 2 touchdowns on the ground, like, another 1 or 2 touchdowns there. And that kind of salvages him there a little bit. But even doing that, I don't know that you're going to see him tick up inside of quarterback 2 last year. I think that probably moves him to quarterback 25, 26 on the season there. And that's something that I can be looking up here in a bit, but I just don't see that one necessarily happening with the light switch type of thing here this year. I think that's still going to be a work in progress. This Bears defense isn't necessarily great. This offense, like I said, outside of David Montgomery, Darnell, Mooney, and Cole Kmet, I am pretty much out on all the rest of Chicago fantasy options there. And take outside of David, I'm not taking David Montgomery with the first round pick. Probably not even taking him with a second round pick. I've got to get him with the third round type of thing there, right? Darnell Mooney, I've got to get him with a 6th or 7th round pick. I'm not going to take him with the 5th round pick. And Cole Kmet, I'm not going to be, drafting him earlier than round 12, realistically. So, I mean, I just said that I'm in on these 3 guys, but I'm in on them based on where I could get them ADP. This isn't a full-fledged, just go on these guys because the offense
it's a value play, right?
Right.
They're all value plays compared to relative draft position. They're not necessarily like we talked about last year with the Chiefs, Cowboys last year and this year for some. You're not searching for pieces of this offense because it's high powered. It's value and perceived value based off of ADP and where they're going to you.
Right, exactly. And so all of that being said, right, like, again, I don't know that Justin Fields, I don't know that I'm going to be able to get the value on where I would want to try and get Justin Fields at on that one because, he's probably going to I'm probably going to still, especially for Superflex, I'm going to have to spend probably no later than an 8th round pick on him. And at that point, right, I can probably find some other options. And for all intents and purposes, if it's a Superflex, I will have already had my 2 quarterbacks on my roster there. And I don't know that I want to spend a 3rd QB or an 8th round pick on a 3rd quarterback there. I mean, I might, but I just don't see that one necessarily happening there. So that's kind of my reasons on why I'm not necessarily in on Justin Fields this year. If he falls to me in the right spot and I can get him double-digit rounds, potentially I'm taking a shot there because then I'm going for upside and I'm, those double-digit rounds, you're looking a little bit more dart throwy when it's all said and done. Any other thoughts on Justin Fields or the Bears?
No, sir.
All righty, let's go ahead and head on into the Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, 7-10 last year, 59% pass, 41% run. They ranked 26th in points for, 29th in yards for. Head coach is Arthur Smith, and the offensive coordinator is Dave Aragon. Your thoughts on actually, I just missed my whole speech there. Cordarrelle Patterson, running back 9 last year, 153 rush attempts, 18 yards, 6 touchdowns, 52 receptions, 69 targets, 548 yards through the air, and 5 tutties through the air. Thoughts on Cordarrelle Patterson?
I like Cordarrelle Patterson. He's a guy that is going later than he should in redraft leagues. I like him because he's a guy that it's dual position tagged, right? Like he's a wide receiver or a running back. More often than not, anytime I had him on my roster, I plugged him into the wide receiver slot and not the running back slot. And for all intents and purposes, with the way that this Falcons team is built this year, you're probably going to see him split out wide even more, right? Like he's still going to get some touches out of the backfield. He's going to be doing some things there, but he's going to be a wide receiver more so than a running back this year. But if he's dual positioned, it's added versatility to your fantasy roster, and that is a valuable commodity that you don't see across a lot of things. Quite frankly, Deebo Samuel should be a dual positioned fantasy football player. Right? Like if everybody's going to be honest about it, the number of carries that he took out of the backfield and the production that he came out of the backfield with, Deebo should be dual positioned. I've yet to see a site label him as such, which quite frankly, ESPN, Sleeper, MFL, Yahoo, it's horse crap. Like, have your standard and stick to it because his percentages of running back versus wide receiver match up extremely close to Cordarrelle Patterson. Off that tangent.
Fair enough.
I like Patterson. I like Patterson. You can get him as a 3rd, maybe even a 4th running back on your team. He's a guy who is going to be heavily focused on in this Atlanta offense. There is a clear path to volume and targets and touchdowns. So I like Cordarrelle Patterson. And I'm probably going to try and snatch him up where I can to just add some versatility to my roster. He might be, and I don't want to say he's the lone piece to this offense that I would look at, but he's probably the piece that I'm most likely to look at this season.
Right. And I'm right there with you. I do like Cordarrelle Patterson. Where Cordarrelle Patterson has his value for fantasy came through the receiving work far more than it came out of the backfield, right? When you look at the back half of the season, when they were really trying to utilize him more as a running back than they were as a wide receiver or a pass catching option, that's where he kind of fell off as far as fantasy value was concerned. But early in the season, that first half of the season, he was catching balls left and right like crazy. And that's where the fantasy value really truly came there. And it was, it wasn't necessarily as a running back or as the running option there. While he did really well out of the backfield and still put up some pretty decent yards and touchdowns, all of that, that's where his value truly lies, is as a pass catching option and as a pass catching weapon, and really just being an offensive weapon when you look at it. And right now you can probably see him coming off the board in like that 6th to 7th round. I think that you will see him potentially creep up into the 5th round type of thing when we get to redraft season. But even a 5th round pick, I still like that option a lot there for him because of what you said, right? He's a dual guy that I get 2 positions for the price of 1 draft pick type of thing. And I can manipulate my roster to give me an advantage on a lot of those things.
I'm going to put you on the spot here just a second, but I know you have the tool there right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
If you take his fantasy points and plug him in as a wide receiver, where does he rank among wide receivers? So if he's 9th with running backs, where is he with receivers?
Give me just a moment and I'll get there.
And the whole point of this exercise is to validate your – if you have to take him in the 5th, then take him in the 5th standpoint, because I'm willing to bet that if you take that fantasy output, put it into the wide receiver bucket, he's still a better wide receiver than a lot of guys that you were taking in the 5th round.
All right, so Cordarrelle Patterson scored 208.6 points in half-point scoring last season, which as a running back put him 9th, but as a wide receiver – let me get there real quick. Find this.
Sorry, I kind of put you on the spot. We should have talked about this pre-show.
All right, so that puts him with the same. Wow, that puts him with the exact same number of fantasy points as Mike Williams last year, which would have been wide receiver, 10, tied for wide receiver 10 when it's all said and done.
Absolutely worth the 5th round pick, arguably worth a 4th round pick, but people have a negative connotation associated with him. So 5th or 6th, to Derek's point, smash yes, and your team will be better for it. The path to volume is clearly there this year.
Right. I would agree with that. And, that's one of those that you've actually now have some options there, because both he and Darnell Mooney are going right around the same kind of area as far as drafts go. So when you look at it from that standpoint there too, right? Like you've got 2 options there that, you could pivot, if one of them gets taken right before that.
The Mooney truthers are going to be hating me because I'm going to tell everyone to draft Patterson over Mooney now.
Oh, don't get me wrong. If I'm on the clock, I'm drafting Cordarrelle Patterson over Darnell Mooney. Don't hear what I'm not saying here, but it's just interesting that, this is one of those that I'm just giving the folks options, right? If Cordarrelle Patterson is a guy that you're heavily targeting and he comes off the draft board like a pick or 2 right before it's your turn, you do have a pivot there where you can go to a Darnell Mooney type and still get a ton of volume out there. So a couple of plays I like there. Any other thoughts here on Cordarrelle Patterson?
No, we like him. He gets the stamp of approval.
Agreed. All righty, let's go ahead and go to Damien Williams, new addition to the Atlanta Falcons this offseason. Finished running back 71 last year, 40 rush attempts, 164 yards, 2 touchdowns, 16 receptions, 23 targets, 103 yards through the air, and 1 touchdown as a backup in Chicago. Thoughts on Damien Williams?
I'm not going to make the same mistake with Damien Williams that we all made with Mike Davis last year and tell you that, and I guess with Mike Davis, I think we all said don't do the 5th round deal, but people still did. Anyway, Damien Williams is going to be a serviceable part of this offense. He is going to allow Cordarrelle Patterson to see, 5+ targets a game and really boost those passing numbers. But Damien Williams himself, I would be shocked if he finishes above running back 3 territory. I just don't see this offense being able to move the ball, sustain a lead, and being able to milk the clock well enough to truly have that amount of fantasy value. He is a guy that, again, in deeper drafts, he's a guy worth having. He's some running back depth, which is always a nice thing to have in your rosters. But I think at the same time, there's others that I would rather have. I would rather have Devin Singletary, even with James Cook in Buffalo. I think I'd draft Devin Singletary over Damien Williams, right? Like, I think I would draft Tony
I absolutely would draft Damien Williams or Devin Singletary over Damien Williams. That's not even close for me.
Well, but I'm just saying, a lot of people, the Singletary fade has been pretty hard, right? James Cook went in, and James Cook's not going to be eating up a ton of carries on the ground, I don't think, but just something like that. You start to talk about backup running backs. We talked about Tony Pollard and Alexander Madison. I'm probably taking Pollard before Williams. I don't know that I'm taking Madison before Williams, though, even though Madison's ADP is I believe it's higher, just because of how those teams split carries and how that works out. So he's a piece to have in deeper leagues. I'm not searching after him. He's another guy, right? I'm not searching after. If he falls into my lap and it's the 12th round and I'm, I could use a little bit of running back help here. I'll see how this works for a couple weeks. If he doesn't work, then I drop him and pick up some free agent. Like, that's okay. But he at least has an avenue for relevance, but I don't know that's going to get fulfilled based off of how this Atlanta offense is going to look.
I would agree with that, although I think that he gets supplanted as the number 2 on the depth chart there by the guy we'll talk about next here before the season's over. Damien Williams, right? Like, he definitely had a great run back when he was with the Chiefs, and didn't necessarily
Super Bowl the MVP or the Super Bowl MVP that season, not Mahomes.
Right, which is something that we were saying right after that game got done, and even saying during the game, but. Damien Williams is a guy that, is more of a guy that is kind of that consummate pro that you can have in the locker room, that you can have, having do those things. But I don't think that he's going to have any fantasy value when it's all said and done here this season. He's a pass for me. And for the most part, he'll be undrafted in most leagues out there. So if you really want to keep an eye on him, add him to a watch list. It's not a bad idea, but, Damien Williams, I think where you're going to see him have value is I think he'll come in on 3rd down in this offense. He'll still get a couple of runs on the 1st and 2nd down, but I think primarily he'll come in the 3rd down and obvious passing situation type of things there, so that Cordarrelle Patterson can be out running routes on those things, and Damien Williams picks up the pass pro, which is what he's pretty good at. So I think that's probably going to be more his role with this one necessarily than being like the 1-2 type of thumper, things like that. Any other thoughts here on Damien Williams? All right, let's go ahead and head to the rookie Tyler Allgeier, drafted in round 5, 151st pick from BYU. Thoughts on Tyler Allgeier?
Allgeier's a guy I've been able to pick up a ton of shares of in rookie drafts. Ton of shares of in rookie drafts. Anywhere from mid to late 2nd round. I think in one draft I was able to get him in the 3rd, just because of everybody was going so wide receiver heavy. So he's a guy I'm taking a ton of flyers on. They don't have youth at that position between Damien Williams and Cordarrelle Patterson. So in dynasty situations, there is a clear path to opportunity. We'll see what comes from that. But again, some of that is all you can ask for, right? Is the guy going to have a chance? He's going to have a chance in this offense. So therefore, I'm drafting him. I think by the time redraft season comes along, he's going to be going higher than Damien Williams, which doesn't necessarily hurt my feelings, right? Like that does tend to happen. So I will be testing the waters, if you will, come redrafts to see if I'm going to fill him in on my roster in the 9th or 10th round. But the kid has a lot of power. He has a lot of strength coming out of BYU. He doesn't have a whole lot of wear and tear on him. All things considered, they don't really hit hard in the Pac-12 anyway. Yes, I just said it. So I'm not too much worried about the usage in college. So I will be interestingly awaiting more up-to-date redraft ADP numbers to try and figure out if this is a guy that I'm going to take a chance on or not. But in dynasty rookie drafts, I am all over this guy. I have him in a ton of different places. A lot of it's just because that's how the board felt me. Go wide receiver in the first round, was able to pick him up in the second round to kind of pair that out and continue to build my dynasty rosters. So we're going to see what the kid does, but he has the ability to be a very serviceable running back in the NFL.
Agreed. Right. I do think, like I said, I think that he supplants Damien Williams. Even before the midpoint of the season, as far as the running back 2 on the depth chart here. I really like the what he can bring to the table. Right. He's. And I think that's really where you see the first and second down kind of running work end up going, is more in Tyler Allgeier's way. And again, them using Cordarrelle Patterson as more of a receiving option there. So I like it. I'm going to be I'm definitely in on him in rookie drafts, very much to the same point you just said, right? I think that he provides you a ton of value in the mid to late second. And I've gotten him in as early as the third as well, or in the early thirds there as well, a couple of different places, as well as the fact that for most of redraft leagues right now, he'll be going undrafted in most of those. But he's a guy that, if he's still on the board in the last round of my last round of my redraft league, I'm going to throw the dart there and just see if it sticks. Because that's a type of move that, he could very easily get enough volume to be a great depth option for my fantasy roster there. And at a 14th round pick or 15th round pick, whatever your league is, shoot, that's, if nothing else, I'll know what I get. I'll at least have an idea of where I'm at with 4 weeks into the season and can move on from him too, if I need to, with very little capital there. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on over to the wide receiver room. Drake London was their first round pick, drafted number 8 out of USC. Thoughts on Drake London?
I like Drake London. I like this landing spot for him. Clear avenue for targets and target share with this team. So obviously the Calvin Ridley news, he is kind of their speedster. He is their big receiver to be able to go across the middle. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how the Falcons truly choose to utilize him. But I do think that there's the opportunity for, 110 targets his rookie campaign. If he's able to come down with, 80 receptions, you could see him get to, 1,100 yards, something like that. And then touchdowns, you want to see somewhere between 5 and 7 to kind of make it worthwhile. But as far as rookie receiver landing spots this season, Drake London, along with Treylon Burks, they have the clearest path for fantasy relevance right away as a rookie. The last couple of years we've been spoiled, right? Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and having that immediate fantasy wow factor. These two guys are probably the two that give you the clearest path to that. I don't think they're going to quite get there based off the offensive philosophies, but if you're able to grab him in a respectable, 7th, 8th round of a redraft, he could fill in as a wide receiver 3 for you. Maybe if the matchup's right, or if he's on a heater, you go ahead and stick him into that wide receiver 2 spot in your lineup and see what happens. So I like Drake London a lot. He is a guy that I am keyed in on for redrafts, just to have a share or two of him. I'm not going and getting him everywhere, but a share or two of him. to see how it goes. Selfishly, in dynasty leagues, there's a part of me that thinks maybe this season's a bit of a bust because he's the only, him and Kyle Pitts are going to be the guys that they're keyed in on, maybe a little bit of Cordarrelle Patterson. So if he doesn't perform in year one for dynasty purposes, don't freak out. Understand what's happening in the offseason, because if Calvin Ridley is coming back and you pair Ridley up with London and Pitts, I think Drake London has a much better year two than what he could potentially have in year one. And if owners are frustrated and think he's a bust, if you will, because they're not reading the tea leaves, this offseason you can go and kind of grab him on the cheap and ride him out here for the next few seasons.
Right. Well, and especially if Ridley comes back there too, like that actually tends to drive the value down on him as well, on top of the fact that, coming off of potential, off that scenario. But yeah, Drake London's a guy that is one that I would be looking at in probably the 8th round. That's probably about where I'd be targeting him, is somewhere in about the 8th round on that one. And very much to your point, right? 3rd, 4th, probably more of a 4th wide receiver at that point on my roster when it's all said and done. But I do like the option there. I'd like the fact that he's a big body frame kind of guy. He's made to make some contested catches, but one of those that it was even funny, like looking back through a lot of his college tape there and watching him go back through that. He's known as a contested catch guy, but one of the things that kind of stood out to me was the fact that the throws were late coming to him at USC. Like, it was bad quarterback play as much as it was contested catches, where he was having to, he had separation and the quarterback just couldn't hit him in stride. So I think that there's an element to this game, to his game, that we haven't necessarily seen in college, from the standpoint that he can actually get separation, or at least could in college, and just, didn't get known as that because the ball was delivered late often. But I think this could be very interesting to see. And I think that he does have a fairly decent year. I think he's going to get a ton of volume. Atlanta's going to be down a lot. But the problem is that you're not going to see this Atlanta Falcons team find the end zone much. So you're going to be a little bit limited there as well. Let's go ahead and head on through to Bryan Edwards, who was wide receiver 63, 34 receptions, 59 targets, 571 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 9.78% target share out there in the desert of Las Vegas coming over this offseason. Thoughts on Bryan Edwards?
I liked Bryan Edwards last year, probably a little bit more than most, and got burned a little bit, right? Like, he just didn't quite pan out with what the Raiders were trying to do. He gets new life in Atlanta. They needed help in this wide receiver room. He's a guy that should be able to come in and be your chain mover, right? Like, he doesn't have blazing speed. He runs a pretty good route, though. So he's a guy that if he's able to come in, and all these guys are building rapport with Mariota, right? So it's not that anybody has an advantage at this point, but if he's able to come in and use the fact that he has been in the NFL for a couple seasons now to his benefit, we might see him start the season off as the top receiver in Atlanta, and it might eventually change towards Drake London. But I think Edwards has an opportunity to targets at least. So he's a guy that, I'm keeping an eye on, right? He's a late wide receiver, wide receiver, he'd be your wide receiver 5, maybe even 6 in some cases. Just most people have no idea about this kid. He's still young. He's still developing. We'll see what this offensive staff can do with him that maybe the Raiders weren't able to do. So he's a guy that I'm willing to throw a late round flyer on in a couple different leagues just to, check the pulse of it, see how it's going. But he's also a guy that I'm going to kind of put a star next to, if you will. And I will keep track of what he's doing week over week to see if I can beat the rush if he does start out a little bit hotter than a lot of people expected, to be able to maybe get in front of that and utilize him in some aspects, possibly in leagues where you have to start 3 receivers and you still have like a flex spot or 2 flex spots that you need to fill after that. Like, you need bodies. And at this point, he's just as good as anything else wide receiver wise that the Falcons have to offer, and truly understand what Drake London's going to be all about.
Agreed, right? Like, Bryan Edwards to me is a guy that's going to be a undrafted guy that you add add on to the watch list and you just keep an eye out on that one. Like that's that same type of deal for me on this one. Not a guy that I'm going to be targeting in any draft, but is a guy that does have and has had several, a lot of intrigue around him for several years now. Like, is this going to be the year? Is this going to be the year? Right? Like, I remember the year that he was drafted, there was a lot of folks thinking that he was actually the better wide receiver that they drafted in that draft class, even though he was taken much later than their number one pick. But yeah, this is one of those that, again, I'm not going to be spending draft capital on him. I'm not going to be seeking him out in the draft, but is a guy that I will be keeping an eye on through the watch list, something like that. So let's go ahead and head over to Olamide Zaccheaus, wide receiver, 78 last year, 31 receptions, 53 targets, 406 yards, 3 touchdowns, 9.55% target share.
Pass. No, I just don't have any interest in him. Again, much like the Bears, this offense doesn't have the high-powered capability that you at least thought it could have with Matt Ryan. Marcus Mariota just doesn't quite provide that, and as efficient as he can be at times, I just don't see there being that many mouths to be fed, right? Like, we still need to talk about Kyle Pitts. We've already talked about Cordarrelle Patterson. We both like Drake London. We think Edwards could be a thing. Like, there's only so many footballs to go around in an offense that's not going to be dominating time of possession. So this is the guy that I'm just saying no to, and I'm not paying any attention to him. And if I'm wrong, I will atone for that sin later on.
Yeah, that's just a hard pass for me. I'm not even going to go into that much explanation. Just hard pass. No, thank you. I don't even know that I'm going to keep him on a watch list or really keep that much of an eye on him unless he has just a monster breakout game. Then to put himself back on my radar. But at this point, I'm pretty well out on him. All right, let's go ahead and move on over to the tight end room. Kyle Pitts, who finished tight end number 7 last year, 68 receptions, 110 targets, 1,026 yards, 1 touchdown, 19.82% target share. Thoughts on Kyle Pitts?
I like Kyle Pitts, right? I'm not a big draft tight end early guy, but Kyle Pitts, I think you could see him kind of branch out and be this next elite type tight end this season. And I think a lot of that's because we've seen Mariota have the ability to support really good tight ends, right? He did it with Delaney Walker. So not that those are the same type of players, but he does look towards his tight end. He likes the shorter throws. He likes his safety blanket. So Kyle Pitts, with having Drake London, Kyle Pitts doesn't have to just split the seam and run all these wide receiver routes anymore, right? Like, he can run shorter, intermediate routes, be that safety blanket, and I think we see that volume come naturally that way, and I expect his touchdowns to go up, right? So right. I think we can see him go from wide receiver 7 to wide receiver 3, 4, 5, something like that, right? And it doesn't sound like a big jump, but in this tight end room, that type of jump is big. Like, there is a big difference in tier gaps. So I think Kyle Pitts can jump that to that next tier, and he is the guy that we will be talking about with the Travis Kelce's, Darren Waller's, and Mark Andrews by the time this season's done and over with.
Yeah, and really the big issue with that was just the simple fact that he missed out on a ton of touchdowns, right? Like, just 1 touchdown on the season, and that was really really the big difference between him. And so, for instance, you look at like a Travis Kelce and Kyle Pitts. Travis Kelce only had about 70 more yards through the air, like 70 more receiving yards was it. Kyle Pitts had a fantastic season as far as yardage goes. One of the big separators out there was, Travis Kelce had 8 touchdowns. Kyle Pitts had 1. So again, right, there's a lot of upside for this young man, and how they are going to have to use him. I do believe there's going to be a ton of volume there. This was one of those, though, that, again, right, like, I remember us trying to tell folks, like, do not overdraft Kyle Pitts, because he was coming off the board as the 3rd or 4th tight end in a lot of redraft scenarios. And had you waited and taken, Mark Andrews, who went a round, sometimes 2 rounds later than Kyle Pitts in just about every draft, that's where the gold was on that one. So Kyle Pitts, I think, does have a very big bounce back year. Again, he'll be a target machine. He'll be a yardage machine. The question is are the Falcons going to be able to get down into the red zone enough, get down inside of there for them to punch the ball in, and will Kyle Pitts tick up there around 5 or 6 touchdowns? And I think the answer is yes. So I think that you're going to see him, finish easily inside that tight end 4 category this year. So I'm liking that one. It's all going to be dependent upon where you're going to have to take him, because I know a lot of folks out there still very, very high on this guy and are taking him end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th type of territory right now. And again, right, like depending upon the tight ends and how they break out there, you could potentially wait a little bit, take a high-powered wide receiver with that end of 3rd, beginning of 4th round type of capital, and be better off on it as far as your roster composition goes. So, alrighty, head over to the quarterback room. Marcus Mariota, who threw all of 2 attempts last year, 1 completion, 4 yards, 50% completion percentage, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 13 rush attempts for 87 yards, and 1 touchdown on the ground. Thoughts on Marcus Mariota coming over from the Raiders?
I think Marcus Mariota's pretty well cemented into quarterback 2 territory. Like, I don't see him bridging that gap. Probably somewhere along the lines of, maybe quarterback like 21, 22. He's going to have weeks where he's really good and people like what he has to offer. And then there's going to be other weeks where he's just going to kind of crap the bed. The benefit that he has is his legs. Like we saw last year, yes, he got hurt with Vegas, but when he did play and was able to use his legs, it created problems for the defense. So he still has some speed. He still has some wiggle. I think that's part of what this Falcons team needs, just to kind of keep defenses on their heels slightly. So, he is a guy that I would entertain picking as like my 3rd quarterback in a super flex league, but I don't know that I have enough faith in him or this offense to take him as my 2nd quarterback if I'm waiting longer.
Yeah, I don't know that I've got anything else to add there. I think you're right. I think he finishes inside QB2 territory and is a guy that I'm not looking to necessarily target as my 2nd quarterback, but my 3rd quarterback to give me some depth on a super flex. So I like that one. Let's go ahead and move on over into Desmond Ridder, who was the 3rd round pick 74 from Cincinnati, going to the Falcons. Thoughts here?
I've picked up a couple shares of him in rookie redrafts, in rookie dynasty drafts. I'm not touching him in redraft leagues. Like I'm going to give Mariota every opportunity. If the writing's on the wall, maybe I pick him up, but we saw what Desmond Ridder was all about against Alabama, right? That's the most pro-ready defense that he faced this past season, and he was not good. Like, he was nervous. He was rattled. The tight coverage really messed with him a little bit because he didn't have wide receivers. So I'm not partaking in the Desmond Ridder event this year. Next year might be a different story, but for this season, I'm going to say thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, I like him as a dynasty throw there. This is one of those that, the Falcons are going to be bad. So we very well may see him get some opportunity here towards the end of the season, and just so the Falcons can see what they truly have there. Because there's a very real possibility that the Falcons are picking top 5 again here in this next draft. In fact, I would bet that they are going to be a top 5 draft pick before the season even starts here, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 wins when it's all said and told. So I don't see them being very good, and I could see Desmond Ridder getting some play at the end of the year. But again, I'm not going to be touching him in a redraft there. Alrighty, any other thoughts on the Falcons? On to the Denver Broncos, who finished 7-10 last year, 54% pass, 46% run. They were ranked 23rd in points for, 19th in yards for. New head coach Nathaniel Hackett, new offensive coordinator in Justin Outen. Thoughts on the Broncos? Oh, sorry, I did it again. On to the running back room. Javonte Williams finished running back 19 last year, 191 rush attempts, 857 yards, 7 TDs, 41 receptions, 51 targets, 298 yards through the air, and 3 touchdowns. Thoughts on Javonte Williams?
I really like Juggernaut Javonte. he's still going to finish in running back 2 territory. So he's being overdrafted
significantly
in redraft leagues. So because of that, as much as it hurts my feelings, I'm probably not going to have much of him, if any of him, because of how high he's being drafted. A lot of teams he's the guy, he's going to be a top 10 back, and he has the skill set to do so. He does. But with the Broncos bringing back Melvin Gordon, I think we're going to see something closer to what you just put up for last season. I do think there's improvement, so he might get to running back 15, 16, something like that. But Melvin Gordon is going to be a factor. Like, he's going to be a spell back. We've seen how Green Bay used Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, and then Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, right? Like, you can have a number one back, but then the second guy's also getting a lot of run too. So I don't think this is a workhorse situation. They're going to be splitting carries. And as much as I love Javonte Williams, I am not willing to draft him in the second round for a guy who's going to finish as an RB2.
Right. Absolutely. And I'll summarize my thoughts on Javonte Williams with the same thing that I said to a guy that we were in trade negotiations with for Javonte Williams, where, everybody's incredibly high on that one. And I just asked what is it that you're looking for on this one? And, I'm not, looking to, break the bank and starts listing player, draft pick kind of thing. And I go, okay, so I get you, but realistically, what do you want for a running back 2 that's in a 50-50 split committee with a new offensive coordinator, new offensive scheme, and as a guy that it will finish in running back 2 territory again this year? Because all of that you just said is not what is going to be the value on that one, right? It's not. Melvin Gordon, right? Like, as much as everybody wants to, kind of downplay his significance in all of this, Melvin Gordon has one of the best noses for the end zones in the NFL and has had that for several seasons, right? There's a reason that you saw him continually get in there. And when it turned down into the red zone, it was Melvin Gordon in there more often than not than Javonte Williams. I don't know that necessarily changes much there. Javonte got more run or more play when it came to the passing work than Melvin Gordon did, but very similar as far as their rushing attempts there go. So love Javonte Williams, love the player, love his work ethic, love to see him go out there and just run people over and break tackles and, was just a dominating force on the field. Absolutely love his style of play and loves what he brings to the table. But for fantasy, I'm right there with you. I'm going to be out on him because his draft capital and what I'm going to have to spend is not going to be returned, because I am going to have to pick him most likely as maybe the 10th running back off the board, and he probably finishes closer to running back 20. So there's 10 guys between where he finishes and where he's drafted at that I could pick that are going to return better value for me there. So just unfortunate. Let's go ahead and move on over to Melvin Gordon, who also saw 191 rush attempts, 808 yards, 7 touchdowns, 27 receptions, 36 targets, 207 yards through the air, and 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Melvin Gordon?
I think Melvin Gordon, I like the value that you get with Melvin Gordon. He is a guy that is fringe running back 2, right? Like, that is what you're going to get with him. We know Javonte is probably going to see a little bit more this year than what he saw last year. Gordon probably a little bit less. But the Broncos are also going to be leading in the fourth quarter a bit more this year. At least we anticipate that with bringing Russell Wilson into town. So, therefore, you're able to grab Melvin Gordon so late in drafts because people have just given up and abandoned this guy. I like the fact that I can get him at a discount and fill him in as my 4th running back in a lot of different cases. And I can play him in my flex spot if I need to and know I'm not getting shut out. I know he's going to see volume week in and week out. I know that he's going to be given opportunities to score touchdowns. I know that he's really good at pass protection. So at least it drives opportunities on the field. So while he is not the top 10 back that he was with the Chargers, he still provides a lot of fantasy relevance, and he is a guy that you can get really, really good value on if you're willing to understand the fact that he is going to be playing second fiddle, but it's not a massive discount of a second fiddle compared to some RBBCs that we see in the NFL these days.
Right. I mean, you look at it, he is, a late, realistically, he's about an 8th round, well, seventh to 8th round type of draft pick out there in most cases. And when you're talking about that kind of value, on a guy that should finish RB2 type of territory, it's a very easy smash the yes button and go ahead and move on there. The more we go through this episode tonight, the more I'm beginning to realize I like a lot of guys in the 7th round of drafts right now. So, because the value is certainly there for a lot of these guys. And Melvin Gordon, again, I think that you'll see him, in cumulative probably get right around double-digit touchdowns. I think you'll still see him around in cumulative 1,000 yards from the line of scrimmage, whether it's, mixture of pass and run. Doesn't matter. I think that you'll see him still get about 1,000 total yards and around about 10 touchdowns, which for a guy that you can pick up in the 7th or 8th round is tremendous value. So sign me up for the Melvin Gordon Express and let's go. And we're going to head straight on over into Courtland Sutton here. And before we get there, Peng's Picks chiming in there saying he's always here for Melvin Gordon talk. Well, you joined right at the right time, Peng's Picks. I absolutely love it. So let's go ahead and head on over to Courtland Sutton, though. Courtland Sutton, wide receiver 44, 57 receptions, 95 targets, 73. I'm sorry, I messed that one up. I have to look that one up there as far as his yardage goes.
I believe it's closer to 730.
Probably. That's probably correct. 763 yards, 2 touchdowns, 18.99% target share. Thoughts on Courtland Sutton?
Courtland Sutton he's a guy that I like. I know both of us like him, right? He's someone that he's a good wide receiver depth piece. He's a good guy that if you're going running back heavy early, he's a guy that you can fill in and plug in as your second wide receiver and not be too far out by the time this is all said and done with. Don't let last season fool you. Russell Wilson does change everything. So instead of wide receiver 44, he could finish as wide receiver 17 this season, and I wouldn't be shocked with that. And so getting a guy that you can pick up in the 7th, 8th round, there you go, Derek, another guy in that range that you like.
He's more of a 6th round guy, but yeah, I get your point.
Sorry, I've been too many super flex leagues, man. They keep falling because of all those damn quarterbacks. Right. So even the 6th round, wait on. Okay, fine. I could pair him up with a strong wide receiver 1, and then you wait a little bit, take the round discount by not going Jeudy, and pick up Sutton, and go from there. Like, this offense will support 2 top 24 wide receivers, right? And yes, there's 3 guys there, but I think that 3rd guy still is in the top end of wide receiver 3 territory. Like, we are going to see some really different things out of Russell Wilson this year because Nathaniel Hackett will play into how Russ wants to play, not how Pete Carroll wanted Russ to play.
Right.
So there's going to be some growth there. So I like Courtland Sutton a lot. I like the value that's there, and he is a guy that I am very happily picking up as we get into the mid rounds of drafts at what I perceive as a very deep discount.
Yes. The disrespect for Courtland Sutton is real right now. And it amazes me how often I see folks taking Jerry Jeudy over Courtland Sutton. Jerry Jeudy, clean route runner, checks a lot of boxes. Like, I'm a big fan of Jerry Jeudy, but for fantasy, when I can take a player that's got a round discount on that one, and I think will outperform somebody, I'm absolutely all in on that. And I think that is going to be the case here. I do think Courtland Sutton finishes above Jerry Jeudy this year. It's not going to surprise me to see that one. You look at it, right? He had 95 targets, 57 receptions. And that was a lot of the fact that, balls just weren't overly catchable when being thrown his way, even though you got 19% of the target share, only 2 touchdowns. Like, the Denver offense last year was the issue. And a lot of the reason that a lot of the guys that were running that offense are no longer in town.
Right.
So
well, if you go back and look at the film, how many deep balls from Bridgewater at the beginning of the season were just off?
Yep.
Right. And part of that's Bridgewater and everything else, but they sent him deep a lot at the beginning of the season. And his stat line could look completely different if they were able to connect on one or two of those, right? You'd be looking at over 800 yards. You'd be looking at, maybe another touchdown or two. And you go from wide receiver 44 to wide receiver 32 pretty quick just by connecting on a couple passes.
Right. Like point illustrated in weeks 4 to weeks 5, right? Weeks 4, he finished wide receiver 64, 3 receptions, 8 targets for 47 yards. Week 5 finishes catches 7 balls on 11 targets for 120 yards and a touchdown, right? Like, very similar to what you're talking about, that the ball, like Teddy Bridgewater was really good at moving the chains, keeping the drives alive. You're doing that kind of stuff. The deep ball is not Teddy Bridgewater's forte there. That is, Russell Wilson is probably one of the best deep ball throwers in the league and has really built that along over the years. So I think you're right. I think Courtland Sutton, it's not going to surprise me to see him absolutely go gangbusters this year, to the point where I don't know that I'm quite bullish as you are at wide receiver 17, but not going to surprise me to see him wide receiver 20, wide receiver, kind of in that range there. So I'm just a couple spots behind you on that one. But again, I think it's very possible that we see him get 130 to 140 targets in this thing. Again, I think it's very plausible that you see him around about 1,100 yards when it's all said and done. And I think it's very plausible that you see him around 5 or 6 touchdowns. Not going to surprise me in the least. And a guy that I can pick up in the 6th to 7th round, sign me up for it and let's go. Jerry Jeudy, the other guy, the wide receiver 2 for the Broncos anyway. Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 96 last year, 36 receptions, 51 targets, 437 yards, 0 touchdowns, 10.85% of the target share. Thoughts on Jerry Jeudy?
We kind of touched on Jeudy a lot, talking about Sutton, right? So Jerry Jeudy is a guy who's going about the 5th round. People think that he's just like he's going to be Russell's default go-to guy. And while Jeudy does run a crisp route and Russell Wilson does like to just throw it to the open guy, he doesn't really play favorites, as we saw in Seattle. Jeudy has been nicked up from time to time, right? He hasn't played a full NFL season yet in his first 2 years. Obviously, he had his legal situation a couple weeks ago, so we're not quite sure if the NFL is going to be asking him to sit on the sidelines for the first couple of games of the season just yet, and what kind of investigation that's going to lead to. But he is going to be a top 24 wide receiver. So do I think he's 5th round value? No, I think he's probably like back to back with Courtland Sutton, honestly, somewhere in the 6th, maybe in the 7th, depending on how it falls to you. But again, I could see him top 20, just like Courtland Sutton. I think their statistics may not look the same, but their fantasy production will be the same, right? Like you might see Jeudy with 9 touchdowns and Courtland Sutton only with 6, but Sutton might have the yards and the receptions to offset that, right? So it's just based off of personal preference at that point. But I like Jeudy. I have no problem drafting Jeudy if he falls to me. But much like Javonte Williams, I am not going to reach for players in the top, 4, 5, 6 rounds of a draft. Like I'm going to get the most value I possibly can to solidify and anchor my team. And I will worry about searching for high points as I start to round out the roster, but it's not going to be a cornerstone of my fantasy build in a redraft.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that one. I don't know that I'm as bullish on Jerry Jeudy as you are there. I think that Denver has the potential to have 2 receivers finish inside the top 24 for wide receivers and finish in wide receiver 2 territory. Jerry Jeudy is a guy that even when he is healthy and playing in, suiting up for games, playing in games, he's a guy that hasn't necessarily seen a high snap share, hasn't necessarily seen a high snap count there, right? Like last year, he only saw about 65% of the snaps when healthy on that one. And again, right, like the rapport wasn't necessarily there with Bridgewater, low target share to it. So So I think that you're going to see a good fantasy production for him. But I think he ultimately kind of finishes wide receiver 3 territory, probably wide receiver 25, 26 is what I'm seeing, just outside that range to it. And there's some other guys on this in this wide receiver room that I'm very interested to talk about here as well. But Jerry Jeudy, absolutely right. Like, he's a guy that you've got to pick up in the 5th round in order to put him on your roster. And I think there are receiving options that are going to go later in drafts this year that will finish higher than Jerry Jeudy on the Broncos. Love the player, love the way that he plays. Just, I think there's going to be better options here as far as fantasy goes for Jerry Jeudy, or than Jerry Jeudy. Tim Patrick is one of those guys. So Tim Patrick last year finished wide receiver 46, 47 receptions, 75 targets, 639 yards to the air, 5 touchdowns, 16.47% of the target share. Thoughts on Tim Patrick?
I like the value that you get with Tim Patrick. I like how he rounds out your wide receiver room. When you're building your roster, he's a guy that you can get at a pretty deep discount. People forget how relevant he was. He has a good catch radius and catch percentage. And he's a high volume guy. He allows Jeudy to play in the slot, right? As you stick Patrick and Sutton both out wide in 3 wide receiver sets. And he's a guy that I think Russell Wilson's really going to enjoy playing with. He is the guy that I think is going to be the top end of wide receiver 3, as I mentioned, with Sutton and Jeudy being both in wide receiver 2 territory. But if he moves up and either one of those guys slips down, like, we're talking a difference of 7 spots, maybe, and Tim Patrick you get at such a discount that if you're looking for a piece of the Broncos offense, really Tim Patrick's the way that you should probably look if you're looking to get the most bang for your buck. So again, if I miss out on Jeudy's, probably going to go too early for me. If I miss out on Sutton because someone takes him, the middle of the draft or a couple spots before me, so be it. I'm perfectly happy keying in on Tim Patrick and rounding out my wide receiver room with a guy I believe can be a true wide receiver 3 and have no problem filling him in to help out with bye weeks, to help out with injuries, to help out on juicy matchups, where I think the Broncos are going to be airing it out a little bit. So there's no reservation on any 3 of these wide receivers for the Denver Broncos this coming season. And Patrick does hold the most value for your potential reward as opposed to Sutton or Jeudy.
Right. Tim Patrick's a guy that Darnell goes undrafted this year. I'm thinking when it's all said and done, right? Like, he's going off the board right now in like the 14th, 15th round when it's all said and done. But a lot of folks kind of tend to forget that Tim Patrick signed a pretty good extension with the Broncos earlier this year, actually making him one of the higher paid receivers in the league there as well, right? Like, right now he's averaging about $10 million a year on his deals there. And again, right, like, this is the guy that's going to be on the field a bunch, right? You're going to see him and Courtland Sutton line out wide there, and they may rotate around who's playing the X and who's not. But Tim Patrick's a guy that, when he played last year, saw 83% of the targets or 83% of the snap count on that one. So he sees the field a ton and can be that possession guy, can be the check down type of option, can do a lot of really good things. And I think he's going to have a bigger part in this Broncos offense than people necessarily are willing to give him credit for, to the point where, on a 14th, 15th round pick, absolutely going to snap that one up because he's a guy that, I think he finishes kind of right there, right around Jerry Jeudy in overall production when it's all said and done this year. Kind of right there. Again, not going to surprise me if he ends up with, 50, 60 receptions, 700 yards and 5 touchdowns type of thing. Like, that's going to put him kind of right there in wide receiver 3 range. So I like that one a lot. And as a guy that I will be definitely keeping an eye on. KJ Hamler, interesting play here. So KJ Hamler, wide receiver 172 last year, 5 receptions, 10 targets, 74 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1.94% target share. Was a guy that got hurt early in the season, but is a guy that holds a lot of intrigue for me. Thoughts on KJ Hamler?
I like him in best ball leagues. is I think where I really like KJ Hamler. Like he's come out and said he wanted to be the Tyler Lockett of this offense for Russell Wilson, and Tyler Lockett over the past couple seasons had been a boom bust play, right? He was a guy that got a couple deep shots a game. If he came down with those deep shots, which is possible because Russ throws an amazing deep ball, right? So if he comes down with those, Hamler's extremely relevant. If he doesn't or didn't that game, then Hamler's, going to be posting potential zeros for you. So I like him in best ball formats. I think I'm going to pass on him in redraft formats because of that. It's just a little bit too much risk reward. And as good as this Denver offense is, there are only so many mouths to feed. And even at the end of the year, if Hamler ends up with, 46 catches and 750 yards and 2 touchdowns, I don't feel like I'm missing out on a whole lot.
Yeah, I can definitely see that one. KJ Hamler, right? Like the one thing that didn't necessarily make sense to me as far as the comparison went is, he wanted to be the Tyler Lockett on that one. And you laid out where I think that he has potential to be a Tyler Lockett-esque type of receiver as far as the fit goes in that one. One of the things that very much gets overlooked between Russ's relationship with Tyler Lockett and other receivers is when they got into the red zone, that was the guy that Russ just honed in on. Play would break down, scrambling around. Tyler Lockett was the recipient of many, many targets inside the red zone and inside the 10 zone, the 5 zone type of targets. Like he saw the very, very valuable targets there to the point where he was leading the league a couple of years ago in red zone targets there. So I don't see that being KJ Hamler's role in this one. That type of deal. I see it being very much what you laid out there, the boom bust type of potential there. A guy that I will be keeping an eye on, a watch list, things like that, just seeing how that one plays out. But I do absolutely love his value for a best ball format there because he's a guy that you can get with your very last pick in a best ball and is a guy that could potentially, pull down a couple of big, long strikes and put up just a great performance for you. And you spent no capital on him. So like that one a lot. Any other thoughts there?
No, I think you hammered it, right? If you're getting him in the last round of a best ball, you need 1 week out of him to get the value. That's it. And there's a chance he's going to provide more than one, but it's going to be really hard to hone in on exactly when those weeks are going to be.
Right. And even at that point, you don't even, if you're taking him in a 14th, 15th round of a best ball, you don't even need, wide receiver 1 territory type of thing. If he gives you a wide receiver 2 finish one of those weeks, like you more than got your value out of it. So I absolutely love that take. All right. Heading over to the tight ends, Albert Okuegbunam finished tight end 29 last year, 33 receptions, 40 targets, 330 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7.75% target share. Thoughts on Albert Okuegbunam?
I'm interested to see how Nathaniel Hackett's going to use him, right? Because he's not. The Broncos liked him enough to feel comfortable with getting rid of Noah Fant for Russell Wilson, but they didn't like him enough to not bring in another tight end in Greg Dulcich, in Greg Dulcich to compete for targets, right? So I think initially the hype around Albert O was super high, like thinking, okay, this guy's going to be, top 12 tight end. Here we go. I think I'm a little bit more reserved now. Like I think that ultimately we're looking at tight end 15, 16, maybe 17, somewhere in that range. Russell Wilson doesn't feed into the tight end a whole lot. Like we've seen that year over year. They get their touchdowns, but they're not seeing a ton of targets each game, right? Maybe 6 targets between the tight end group consistently week over week. So there's not necessarily a clear path to weekly fantasy relevance. That being said, if he falls in the right spot, yeah, I'll take a flyer on him as a second tight end if I want to carry 2 on my roster. Our home league, he's not going to be around very long. Like someone's going to overdraft the crap out of him in our home league, Derek, just because we're all Broncos fans, right? Yeah. Like, and that's okay. Much like Javonte Williams and Jerry Jeudy, I'm okay letting that go. Like I can separate my fandom and my fantasy roster just fine. So I'm not going to be upset and throwing a fit and throwing out stupid trades just to have a whole bunch of Denver Broncos on my roster. But if he falls, right? If he falls into that right spot, I don't think I'd rather have Albert O instead of Cole Kmet. But I do think that they're very close in how I would evaluate them once I get kind of my rankings done and looked at. I think they're going to finish about the same area.
Yeah, give me Cole Kmet in your scenario there. Absolutely. Right. Albert O is a guy that will be overdrafted when it's all said and done, right? Like you've already seen him drastically creep up the draft boards there, where he's now going as kind of a 10th round pick. In a lot of cases, late 10th, early 13th type of deal there. I'm sorry, early 11th type of deal there. So he's a guy that if I was getting him in the 13th or 14th round, absolutely. That's more so where I see the value on this one. But Albert O is going to be a guy that is going to be a streaming type of tight end option. Like that's really where it's going to be. And I think he's going to be a bit more of a touchdown dependent type of tight end when we look back on this coming season. While he's got a phenomenal athletic profile, he's big, he can run fast, he's got pretty good hands. There are too many other mouths to feed on this Denver roster, to the point where I think at best he is the 4th or 5th highest target share when we look up at this season. It's all said and done, and even if it's a very big pie, you're only going to get so many. A very big pie, and you're still 4th or 5th on the pecking order there as far as targets go. That's going to end up with a pretty small piece of pie. So. I'm going to be out on Albert Okuegbunam for, especially in our home league. Like there's no, I can very easily see somebody running out and taking him in the 8th or 9th round on that one. And that's going to be way too early. Like I said, I'm going to be out on him short of probably the 13th round on when it's all said and done. Let's go ahead and head over to Greg Dulcich. You're just talking about him, drafted in the 3rd round, pick 80 from UCLA. Thoughts on Greg Dulcich?
We were talking about this a little bit before the show. I like Dulcich to have a better fantasy output this year than Albert O. I think the fact that he runs a bit better of a route. He has a bit more speed behind him, can kind of get up that seam in different route concepts. I find him to be more of kind of like the Luke Wilson, if you will, of tight ends going back to Seattle. I think he ends up with more of the touchdown volume than Albert O does. So O might get you down into the red zone, but if you're getting into the 5 and you're looking to toss a jump ball up, you're looking for Dulcich, you're looking for Sutton, you're looking for Tim Patrick, right? Like those are the guys you're throwing jump balls to. And then your underneath stuff, your KJ Hamlers, your Jerry Jeudy, even though he's not a short receiver, he is more of a shifty receiver. And then Albert O to kind of go and possibly, run right into the middle of that defense, right at the goal line, turn and pivot and catch the ball right between the numbers is kind of how I see this looking. That being said, I'm not reaching out and grabbing Dulcich just to go ahead and grab him. Like he's another guy. If I can get him late, in most cases I can. He's probably going to go undrafted. So realistically, I'm probably just going to flag him and just keep an eye on how this Broncos offense looks through the first week or two. And then if I need to possibly stream a tight end or, if I get snake bit by an injury bug or whatever, I might look at him for service week in and week out, but it's going to be matchup dependent. It is not going to be a weekly play.
Cosign. Moving on to Russell Wilson here. So Russell Wilson finished quarterback 16 last year, 259 completions, 400 attempts, 64.8% completion percentage, 3,113 yards, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Also had 43 rush attempts, 183 yards, 2 touchdowns. Thoughts on Russell Wilson?
I expect all those numbers to drastically improve. I expect him to be healthy. I think that this is arguably the best class of offensive weapons holistically that he has had around him in his career. And he's had some pretty good ones, right? Doug Baldwin was a very viable asset. Obviously, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, played with Greg Olson towards the twilight years.
Played with Jimmy Graham, played with Marshawn Lynch.
Mm-hmm. And I think holistically this is just better than any one particular season that he's had with Seattle as far as weapons go. I think the Denver offensive line is better than any he's ever had when he was with Seattle. Maybe outside of the year that they won the Super Bowl, and that's only because they were playing so far above their pay grade. It was ridiculous. So I think he's going to get protected a little bit more. He doesn't scramble as much as he used to, but he is good for a quarterback scramble. Like if you're not paying attention, he is good to go get 15 yards at a time, and he will slide and get down. That's the baseball player in him, so he doesn't take a lot of big, nasty hits. So I expect all that to go up. I expect Russell Wilson to get MVP votes this season, right? The big knock is he's never even, not only has he not won one, he's never even been like nominated or received votes for MVP. I think that changes this year. I think you see him with over 4,000 yards. I think you see him with somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 touchdowns. I like that completion percentage, probably 65 to 67% is right in Russell Wilson's alley. He doesn't turn the ball over a whole heck of a lot. So all the things, and he has a defense that's good enough to get him the ball back, which is kind of what Denver's been known for here lately. It hasn't been their defense that's been bad. They've been giving up points because of short fields, because they've been on the field the entire freaking game. Like all these things, now we have a field general in Denver who can change some of that. So I expect massive things out of Russell Wilson this year. I am drafting him highly. I love drafting him, especially in super flex leagues, like the middle of the second round, right? Like I'll pass on the first round quarterback and get a skill position player, whether it's running back or wide receiver. And then I'll grab Russell Wilson in the second, and he can be my QB1. And then I'll look to fill in with something else later on, right? And kind of go that route. I've done a couple different drafts where that's played out, and I've liked the way that roster's looked. So part of it might be a little bit of hometown fandom, but I truly believe that this situation is better for him, and he's happy to be out of Seattle. And I would not be surprised to see the Broncos, when they open up their season on Monday Night Football in Seattle, I would not be surprised if Russ throws for 380 yards and 4 touchdowns or more, like just to prove a point this first week. So I like him a lot, and I am heavily vested in him in multiple places this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that this is a season that you're going to see a lot of really good things out of him. Again, right, like kind of looking at early projections here, I've got him roughly right around about 4,200 yards. I probably have him right around 33 touchdowns. I think you maybe see the interceptions move up to like 7, 8 in that kind of range there. And very similar as far as the rushing yards and rushing totals there go. So again, I think he's going to have an absolutely fantastic season, and is a guy that will show everybody, why he was forever kind of that fifth or sixth QB off the board for fantasy there. And I think that that's probably about where he's going to finish, is you're going to be kind of that QB 5-6 kind of range here when it's all said and done. And you should provide some pretty good value, because I think he will get slept on a little bit in your drafts on that one. So I'm a big fan of that one. I like it. And I think we're going to see some really good things out of that one. Any other thoughts here on the Denver Broncos?
Go Broncos. I can't wait.
I love it. Go Broncos indeed. All righty. So that's going to take us down here to the end of it. Kevin, any final thoughts out there for the listeners?
Stay tuned, right? We got more team breakdowns, as you alluded to. As we get into the dog days of summer, we're going to be pumping out tons of content, whether it's rankings, kind of draft guides in a sense, right? We'll do our tier rankings. We have, the team rankings, the mock drafts, like all the things that you could need to help set yourself up for a deep run into your fantasy playoffs, and hopefully generating all of you a lot of trophies and a lot of cash. Stay tuned, because you're going to get it here.
Absolutely. That's going to wrap it up for us. Make sure that you're staying tuned. Like Kevin just said there, you can catch us on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, at Good Old Boys FF. One of the best ways to support this independent podcast is head over to the YouTube channel, click the subscribe button on the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast YouTube channel, and make sure that you're subscribed there, because we've got all of this great content, lots of short player videos coming out for you, which come in very handy when you're sitting there on the clock and you're starting to even look around to the next couple of rounds there, and you're like, man, I just don't know about this guy. You can tune in and take a quick listen to a couple of to the boys' thoughts on some of these players while you're going through, and we can help you get your draft in order and set up. But that's going to do it for us. He's Kevin. I'm Derek. We'll see Alex again next week. Have a great one. Be safe.